Good evening, everyone. Hello and welcome to everyone online as well. So this is the second of our two events to tell you a bit more about the Mayday plan for Saxonvale and how we'd approach our development. So we've got a range of speakers tonight. We've got Paul Clark from Stories, our development partner, who's going to talk about our kind of model development and how we're going to try and get the best from the development for Frome. Then we've got Jake Burnyeat, who's going to talk about our aspirations for a microgrid based on solar power, community owned on site. Then we've got Jonny Buckland from Studio Saar, one of our architects, who's going to talk about an alternative to the bridge over Willow Vale, which I actually think is quite exciting, and some new housing development that we're going to put in the place of where the school was going to go, which isn't now going to be going ahead. So how are we going to design that? And then finally, Andrew Kirby from Andrew Kirby Architects, our other architects, is going to talk a bit about his practice and about parking, but it's a lot more important and sexy than you think, and some of the housing numbers and where we're at with that. So, but I don't know if you heard after the first event, a little something happened. Did anyone hear about that? So I thought we might start by just kind of talking about that and trying to demystify a little bit what happened, what is the judicial review, what are the implications of that for what might happen next. So some context. When a planning board looks at a new planning application, their primary responsibility is to assess, well, does this plan fit within the local planning policy and the local plan? And it's for the officer in the council to present a report that advises them as to whether it does or doesn't do that. And if the policy isn't correctly presented, then they can't make an appropriate and correct decision. And so if somebody believes that that information wasn't presented correctly, they can bring a judicial review challenge to say that decision should be quashed, is the term. It's a funny word, isn't it? But it means removes that decision like it hadn't taken place. So Acorn was first actually approved in January 2021, and before that meeting, the officer's report was sent out, and Damon Moore, my fellow director at Mayday Saxonvale, raised the point via his solicitor that it didn't accurately represent local policy, particularly in relation to employment space in Saxonvale. The meeting went ahead anyway with that report, and they got approval. So after that, again, Damon Moore's solicitor sent what is called a pre-action protocol letter, which sounds pretty dynamic, where again warned that there was a whole range of areas where, again, policy hadn't been correctly presented. So Acorn then went back to committee, and I think September of that year, and they did correct some of the issues that had been raised and correctly represented it, but didn't, again, accurately deal with the requirement for employment space in Saxonvale. They got approved only by one vote, 7-6, but given they didn't deal with every aspect, when the S106 notice was issued and the decision notice was issued, then a judicial review challenge was launched against that decision. And the judge has now decided that it is true that they did not accurately represent in the officer's report the requirement for employment space in Saxonvale. So what was the kind of the crux of the misrepresentation was that the judge has now agreed that this is true, that the local plan in an area called CP6, which relates to Frome, that there should be at least, and I've bolded that out for emphasis, but it does say at least, 5,925 square meters of town centre uses, excluding retail, important, is to be provided in Saxonvale. So we can see that if they had correctly represented policy, then the Acorn plan at 4,181 square meters would not have met that policy requirement. And you can see from the green bar that Mayday Saxonvale emphatically does. And it's important to say the excluding retail aspect, they haven't said how much of their plan would be retail. And to be fair, neither have we, but we've got a bit of a buffer there. So if you remove, say, I'm just picking a number, a quarter of that, 1,000, that means they need to provide at least another around 3,000 square metres of commercial space for their plan to be compliant. So that is the option on the table for Acorn, is they can come back to planning board and resubmit their plan with 3,000 more square metres-ish of employment space, and then try and get approval for a third time. And I will point out that Acorn did release a statement this week that said the case centred on a procedural technicality. Well, I really don't think that is a technical procedurality. And I think if they're going to provide another 3,000 square metres of space, that's not what you do in response to something of that level. Anyway, let's move on from that subject onto more positive things. So I'm just going to kick off by talking about, I guess, some wider context around our plan and our kind of aspirations before Paul then talks in a bit more detail about how we'll achieve this. So first of all, we've mentioned it before, but I think it's really worth reflecting on and noting that this would be, if we were successful and were able to go ahead, this would be the largest community-led development we're pretty certain in the UK. And actually, Paul's done some research on this recently, and we can't seem to find anything even in the world. You've even checked ChatGPT, I think. So the research has been very thorough. So that would mean Frome kind of leading the way, which I think Frome would feel intensely comfortable about. I don't know, what do we think? That would be okay? Good. And this would be community development, at scale, and it would be the community in control and the community making decisions. And Simon Brown last week talked a bit about how we would integrate the community into the design process, not a token gesture review at the end once the designs have effectively already been set in stone. So if we're successful and we go through a detailed design, that's how we would approach things. And it means that we would be putting Frome at first at every stage of that development. But it's important to know it also doesn't mean community-led development doesn't mean amateur development. It still means we would engage all of the professional expertise that we need. We've already got a technical team that has got us an outline planning application approved. And with our development partners' stories, we've got all the expertise of delivering at this scale, and all the funding, access, and all of the complexity that needs to be unpicked. We've got the expertise to do that. Not that we wouldn't, though, always be, involving the community where there are expertise that we can also use. And so the model, in its broadest term, in its broadest kind of aim, what are we seeking to achieve? We want a development that retains as much value as possible, as much profit and as much wealth within Saxonvale, within Frome, and within Somerset. And there's a whole range of ways that we would look to do that. It starts definitely with retention of profit, so that we don't have a load of developer profit leaving the town, but we keep that within the town. And it's worth noting that, for most development, it's an extractive process. Frome in itself, its community has built this wonderful place, built this wonderful way of life and community spirit, and that's why people want to move here, and that increases house prices, which has a load of other negative effects. But what it also means is then developers move in and extract that value that we've all created, and so if houses are going to be sold at a premium, then we want to redirect that profit to the town and to the community. But we also want to take every other route that we can. So we'd look to employ locals in any professional work that needs to take place, or we could, engage with apprenticeships to advance training, use this development as a mechanism to advance skills and to boost the local economy wherever we can. So that's the kind of broad aim. So I'm going to hand over to Paul Clark, who's going to talk in a bit more detail about how we're going to achieve this. Is that right, Paul? Yeah, good. Quick mic switch.
Thanks very much, everyone. It's nice to be back. I think I've seen some of your faces before. As Paul said, my name's Paul Clark, and I I'm one of the three co-founders of a development company called Stories. We've been the development partner to the Mayday team for a while now. I lose track. 2 years. Okay, I've come up for 2 years. The company's 5 years old. It was started, we all come from the property industry. We're not sort of outsiders. We've come from inside the industry, and we all came together from a shared sense that actually development could be done in a better way, in a more productive way, in a more responsible way. And so we set out to be the best possible partner to communities and landowners that care about outcomes. And we start there and we work backwards to work out in each situation, what's the best thing that we could possibly do to facilitate those outcomes. So whereas, as Paul was just saying, most development companies are set up to be extractive, they are set up usually with a pot of money, and they point that pot of money at opportunities to generate a return on capital. We start with the outcome and then try and work out what we can achieve together. And we, I think it was last year, we became a B Corp, which means that legally we are bound to put the triple bottom line, so that's social and environmental concerns, up alongside the profit motive. So that is Stories, and I'll come back to a little bit more about us. But one of my co-founders, Richard, was a partner at Argent. So if anyone that's been to King's Cross, he was the partner directly responsible for the fountains, the University of the Arts, and a lot of what you can see. And Ollie, appearing in the back, was responsible for all the underground infrastructure. We call him Mr. Pipes and Wires. And he loves that. And Jess was at Homes England, which is the government agency responsible for distributing investment around the country. Phyllis was at Crest Nicholson for house builder. James was at a co-living operator, and I have a variety of roles. I had a sort of a mixed background, town planning, surveying, and what have you. So we very much come from the industry, and we just decided it's about time that we tried to do a bit better. These are just some of the people that we're working with at the moment. We are the development partner to St Mungo's. We've been delivering some really interesting, definitely post-COVID, the phone really started ringing from landowners that recognise that the old ways are not sustainable, and that we need to do development in a way that is more, it treats the communities more fairly. And so people like the Crown, they've got a new purpose: lasting and shared prosperity for the nation. We've been delivering a community wealth building model for London Borough of Hounslow in Feltham. We are working with Mansfield College in Oxford, who are a really amazing institution, really engaged with outreach, 98% state school intake, really fascinating institution. Key worker housing for the NHS, a really wonderful community facility called the Albany in South London. And early this year, we announced a joint venture with the Aviva Capital Partners, who've given us a facility of £100 million to point at unlocking purposeful development projects. And we just announced our first project with Aviva and the London Borough Barnet. So we're really motoring at the moment. We're excited about that. But fundamentally, like I said, Stories exists to put the outcomes first, and we try and pull together funding strategies to suit. And it's worth just reflecting on sort of the business as usual for developers is generally they bring together other people's money in a way that then they deploy that money and then take a return on the profits that are generated by that money. And most developers put together a combination of bank borrowing and equity, which is cash money. And that cash money generally comes at a price of they talk about an internal rate of return, but it's sort of not dissimilar to a rate of interest, which is quite high. It's in the region of 20% a year is the equivalent that they're looking to generate on their cash. And when you play that over a 4 or 5 year development period, developers are generally trying to double their money. And so when you put together debt and equity, you generally can borrow up to around 80% of the cost of a project. You're generally, the developers are needing to produce around 20% in cash. And when you take 20% in cash, at 20% IRR over a 4 or 5 year period, you get the need to double their money. And that's where this 20% profit on cost comes from. So anyone that's studied other applicants, let's just put it that way, you'll see that developers generally are saying that a project is unviable if I can't deliver myself 20% profit on cost. And that's a direct product of the way they put together their cash, they put together their debt and their equity, and that's the product of that process. And we try and turn that on its head and say, well, actually, that's a route to making money for people that are in that business, which is fine if that's their business. But we actually, if you start from the basis of how do we secure outcomes, it's about retained value in the interests of Frome in this instance. And so it's about how do we reduce the amount of equity that is needed? How do we reduce the amount of borrowing that's needed? How do we bring different pots of money to bear in the interest of the project? And that's something that just completely engages us constantly. How are we doing this differently? How are we thinking, how do we focus on this project to retain value for Frome? And that's it's a bit counterintuitive. We're almost trying to write ourselves out, but that's fine. That's the role we're happy with. And so the modelling that we've been doing with Mayday, Paul and Damon, is looking at how you start to retain as much of the profits for Frome as possible and start to reinvest those. So how do you start to reduce any reliance on third-party investment and retain all of that money? Whereas most developers would be trying to put their money to work so that they can extract a certain amount of profit as well. And that is the root of how we are beginning to show better outcomes than alternative models might otherwise be showing. And what that does is, there's a lot of words on there, but it really gives us the opportunity to be a bit more considered, a bit more generous, a bit more thoughtful, whereas a developer who is chasing financial returns is necessarily going at pace. Time is money, and because they're generally borrowing other people's money or shareholders' money, the quicker that they can turn around that investment, the better it is for them as the developer. So hence you get people who they're not really taking engagement very seriously, they're rushing to get on site, and they're not necessarily being as thoughtful or generous as they might otherwise be. And the other point being is, even in a downturn, like I say, that ability to take a bit more time to think about alternative strategies, to think about how you respond to the inevitable challenges that a development over time throws at you, is one of the principal benefits. And this is really a model that you see at King's Cross, you see in any of the great estates. It's patience, it's looking at the value in the round and not looking at the short-term in-year profit targets. We've actually, that work over the extended period has led to a conversation with a group called Resonance, and Resonance is effectively a social impact fund, and we've been engaged with them for a little while now, and they have come in support of this project. And I think we're okay to say that they have made an in-principle offer to provide the money needed to buy all of land at Saxonvale up front with zero cost of money. So it's effectively grant money, which means that we as developer don't need a return on that money, and it means that the project can operate at an incredibly effective cost of capital, because the capital essentially has no cost. And we have collectively written to Somerset to tell them that that is the situation. We don't need to phase drawdown, it doesn't need to be deferred terms, they can have all the money upfront day one. And because there's no cost to that money, we can still take our time, be thoughtful, be patient, and retain the value for the project and not extract it. We think it's a really fantastic turn of events, because it's a dramatic reduction in risk, and it demonstrates how we can facilitate the outcomes. As I said, we have both written them a letter, and Resonance has also been in touch, but we await a response. And just to kind of reflect on the success of King's Cross, King's Cross is held up as a great example of placemaking, of regeneration. But the lessons there are in our business. My partner Richard and my colleague Ollie, were right in the mix there for sort of over 15 years, and a lot of the lessons there are embedded in the way we approach our projects. And complete credit to the team at Saxonvale Mayday. They are bringing that to bear. That long-term stewardship, focus on place, focus on outcomes, quality, patience, and bringing the right money to bear at the right time. What doesn't get talked about much, actually, at King's Cross is the fact that they are backed by Australian Super, which is a great big long-term, they can take very long-term views with their money. They're not chasing a particular short-term return, and that value retention is what is driving the quality of place. Now, they haven't got it all completely right. Some of the retail's a bit high end, in my humble opinion. But who am I? But this is definitely there's definitely themes in these places that we would love to see delivered in Frome if we get the chance. And that's the end of me.
Good evening, everyone. So I am Jake Burnyeat. I am a director of a not-for-profit company called Communities for Renewables, or CFR. I come up from Cornwall. I can tell you it's even wetter down there. And we work with communities across England who want to generate their own energy. That's what we do. We're a not-for-profit, mission-led company that helps communities generate their own energy. And a community could be a city, a town, a village, or a community housing development. And we've worked with communities at all those scales. But whatever the scale of community we're working with, the principle is the same. That if a community can own its own energy infrastructure, then the money we spend on energy can be a benefit to the local economy, not just a drain on it. That's what we're trying to achieve. Since we set up over 10 years ago, we've helped to develop and finance community-owned solar projects with a capital value of over 70 million. And we look after 50 megawatts of community-owned solar across 7 diverse localities. So 50 megawatts is about 200,000 solar panels. And those solar panels produce the equivalent to the annual consumption of about 13,500 homes. And over their life, all these enterprises are run on a not-for-profit basis, and over their life, they're projected to generate 20, 30, possibly 40 million pounds of surplus income to help fund their community's net zero transition and help households who are struggling to pay their bills. So there's a huge, like the development economy, there's a huge value in our energy economy, and it's generally, under the current system, leaking from localities. So what we've heard about, what we understand about the Mayday Saxonvale proposal, I think it's a great idea. We've worked with solar microgrid projects where just the solar panels and the wires would be community owned. We're working with a really interesting project in Sheffield at the moment, which is a development of 150 houses on an old steelworks. And the community is in the process of buying back their infrastructure from the developer. And the infrastructure isn't just the solar panels and the wires, it's the broadband network, it's the underlying freehold, it's the water network, biomass heat main, and they're going to run that as a community enterprise. The Mayday Saxonvale proposal is that the solar microgrid will be part of an overall community-owned business model for the development. And they've asked me to come along this evening and talk in very basic terms about what is a community solar microgrid and how does it differ from the norm. Next time I come, I'll find some more Frome appropriate houses, but this is what we could find on the free icons. So this is the norm. The norm is a developer build their development. Part of the development they have to put in the electricity wires, they have to put in the water main, and they may not put in the fibre broadband network. And the norm is that with the electricity bit is the wires get adopted by the local distribution network operator, which in your area is Scottish and Southern Energy Networks. Each household then chooses their own energy supplier, might go to Good Energy or Octopus or EDF, and they may or may not have solar panels. So it may be the case that it was a green developer and you bought the house with solar panels on the roof, or if you're lucky enough to have a roof, it may be that you subsequently installed solar at a cost of £5,000 to £10,000. If you have PV, the benefit is dependent on how much of the solar electricity generated you can use as it's generated, i.e. in the daytime when the sun's shining. And the value of PV, of solar electricity as generated, is the avoided cost of buying electricity from the grid. So at the moment that's about 27p, 33p a few months ago. The long-term norm was probably something around 15p. The surplus PV that's sold to the grid is worth much less. At the moment, surplus PV sold to the grid is worth about 15p, but the norm is more like 4 or 5p. So in this simplified schematic, house number 1 has PV, but they're out at work all day. So as they're out at work, working hard, their solar panels are working hard and supplying power into the grid, and that household is being paid about 15p per kilowatt for the solar generated. When they come home at night, turn all the lights on and their cooker on, they're paying 27p to buy power back from the grid. Number 2 is a bit smarter. So they've got solar panels and they've set their appliances to come on during the daytime. So maybe they've set their dishwasher and their washing machine to come on in the daytime. Maybe they've set the hot water heater to come on. Maybe they're really fancy and they bought a battery. So they get some of their power from solar and some of it from the grid. Number 3 doesn't have PV. Maybe they couldn't afford it. Maybe their roof is in the shade of a big tree. Maybe it faces the wrong way. Or maybe they don't have a roof. Maybe they're a lower floor flat and they can't have PV. But anyway, they don't have it. And they're at home all day. Maybe they're, well, for whatever reason, there's many reasons why people are at home all day, using lots of energy. Maybe they've got the heating on because they get cold, or maybe they've got a big supercomputer, they're an architect and they're burning lots of electrons. But they haven't got solar and they're paying 27p for all their power, even though some of the actual electrons are coming from across the street in number 1. So with a community microgrid, the key thing is the electricity network, the wires, are not adopted. That's the biggest step. It's nothing highly technical. It is just the developer doesn't give the wires to the local network operator. And those wires and the solar panels are retained by the community enterprise. And there's a substation which defines the boundary between the public network, the SSEN network, and the community microgrid. And the solar panels on those houses which are suitable for solar panels, they're community owned, they're not individually owned. And the community enterprise is a supplier, not EDF or Octopus. And the electricity generated by the solar panels, rather than just being used by the individual households, it's shared between all the households that are connected to the community microgrid. So the electricity supplied to the development, it comes from a mixture of the solar generated on site, which is shared amongst all the properties, and top up from the grid. The solar generated on site is free, comes from the sun. The solar that comes from the grid probably costs about 27p. The communal substation has a commercial supply agreement. But generally you get a higher utilisation of solar when you're sharing it amongst a community of houses rather than just trying to maximise its use within one property. So for example, 40% of that community's electricity consumption came from solar within the microgrid, and 60% was imported from the grid at market rates. The community could use that for the value of that 40% free electricity to do a number of things. They could slightly subsidise people's bills. Maybe people get a 10% discount, and then some of that money will be used to cover the running costs of the community enterprise, the general community purpose of the development. Some of it might go into a community fund, but there's a value there that can be applied to the community. Consumer protection still applies with microgrids. So in theory, a household still has the right to switch, and the microgrid operator has to facilitate that. So if there's one household that really doesn't want to be part of it, you have to facilitate them to be able to get their own supply from elsewhere. And you can't, the community company can't mark up the power. They can't add on a big margin to the power they're buying from the grid. Legislation stops that. But to stop people wanting to shift, it is important that that community company is providing power on ideally discounted market terms, so people have no reason to want to shift. So community microgrid, it could be run as a standalone community energy enterprise. You could have Freeco, for example, that came in and owned those solar panels and the wires and was the supplier. But with the Mayday Saxonvale proposal, that microgrid will be part of a broader community business model for the development, and any surplus generated by the microgrid will go into the broader community business model for that development. And lastly, a similar principle could apply to broadband. If, like with the microgrid, if the broadband network was retained by the community, you can have a single commercial broadband supply at the interface with the public broadband network, and the cost of that commercial broadband supply will be significantly less than the sum of the individual households and paying normal market rates. So you could have a model where the community company is importing data at commercial rates, selling it on to the residents at a slight discount to retail rates, and also making a surplus that can support the community purpose of the development. So I'm handing over to Jonny, the architect.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Jonny Buckland from Studio Saar, based on the ground floor of the silk mill, surrounded by the site. I'm going to talk about the bridge that is no longer and a new bridge that could be. We followed suit with what Acorn proposed, with placing the bridge across over to Willow Vale as part of our outline. And we have gone to great lengths to try and resurrect an idea that Damon and Paul and some other people in the town have had for a long time, of a different sort of connection within the town and in this area. So if you can all guess where that is, I think you all know where it is. It's the waterway adjacent to the Blue Boar, and it's opposite the Blue House. So we're calling this the Blue Way. I'm going to show some drawings, but the Willow Vale residents have articulated very well the concerns they have with the bridge in its current position, and their objections for the Acorn's detailed planning application are really well presented. So I beg everyone to go and read those if you can. The site is basically situated where we feel pedestrian traffic from Cheese and Grain and the car park would really benefit flow of people coming through into the Saxonvale area. These are just some photos. It would require some amendments to some of the retaining or some of the parapet walls. And we propose that the bridge, just here, as you can see in this plan, sits a bit of a distance away from the Blue Boar facade, and crosses over and creates a new pedestrian riverside walk through into the Saxonvale site. You can see with the red site boundary on the top right that was where the bridge was crossing before, and some of the concerns that this was a dangerous location. There's many delivery vans, lots of pedestrians all day long, and actually taking up some of that space with no pavement on the riverside on that side isn't suitable for a bridge in that location. So we've sketched out some ideas of what that might look like. Obviously, we haven't spoken with the Environment Agency yet. This is just an idea and would need to go through consultation and many discussions. But we feel it could work really well through that space and connect the marketplace, the high street, back to Saxonvale in a really positive way, and actually create a safe space for pedestrians to enter this side of town, because near the Archangel and along that road, the pavement is very tight, and most people do walk in the road along that stretch. So these are just looking at possible ways of dealing with the fact that the waterway needs to be kept clear. So again, structural analysis would be part of the next steps, but looking at ways that we could playfully play with structure to still create the free flow of water and maintenance requirements below. And so that's just looking at our preferred option, which would be a sort of semi-cantilevered structure. The second part is, Paul alluded to the change with St. John's School not taking part of the site. So we've been looking at housing for this area. And I think working with Andrew, Kirby Architects, from the get-go, we were really interested in learning from Frome and the historic community spaces and gardens that this town has. I just want us to all ponder on these pictures for a moment and get excited about what gardens can offer to us and how important they all are. Post-COVID, it's crucial. We all realize how crucial that space is. And the master plan has been driven by this idea of allowing each quarter or each housing area to have the capacity for a communal garden or community space that's shared. Each dwelling would have their own private amenity, but perhaps it would be on a lower ratio, and the actual community space would actually be a bit greater. So this is the St. John's site. We're now calling this the River Gardens site. And before, with the St. John's, we had playing fields running right up to the river's edge. With this scheme, we're able to kind of pull back any sort of significant use for the community in terms of footpaths or noise, and actually maybe give a little bit of land back to wild and natural trees and forest. So I mentioned the historic precedents found within the town. This one's Innox Hill, and there's a number of different developments that are, very old now, where gardens and the demarcations between who owns what are slightly blurred. There's many footpaths that pass by many people's front doors, and they really do invigorate connection and I think really support strong community. Rather than everyone's front door being completely separate on a separate path, you actually, in many developments, you walk past everyone's front doors to get to the spaces where you need in terms of garden space. This one's behind Redland Terrace. I use this garden a lot because I know many people who live on this terrace. And what has inspired me with this is that there's so much social infrastructure that's shared. Here we've got rabbits, we've got climbing frame, teepees, there's stoves to keep warm at night, there's a shared pizza oven, the list goes on. And what's happened is many people have given over their site or part of their garden over to just let it be a big space for the community to use. It's another example of how the footpath connects all of those gardens. So private garden on one side and community garden on the other, and how the outdoor kitchen is just another piece of that infrastructure for children. And this one's behind Keyford Gardens. Again, a really lovely sign that just is very welcoming and just shows how loved it is by everyone who lives on that terrace, a shared piece of infrastructure. So we've been looking at the design for River Gardens a little bit, and I'd just like to say that this is us having a bit of a dream in terms of what it could be. So the images that I'm going to show next are kind of focusing on these possible community garden spaces, and that the architecture is a little bit of a backdrop. It's a little bit of a placeholder. We're not at detailed design where we're working up drawings, but we've tried to create images that evoke a certain what could be in terms of a development. So the development is 36 units in two blocks, and it's sort of looking at how private amenity space and the ratio with more communal amenity space could work. The development is not looking at providing townhouses, but looking at being slightly denser to allow every duplexes and flats where every unit has a front door off the street, but they can be layered up one above the other. And that allows for roof terraces and external space at higher levels to be quite important. So this is one of the views that we created, which, again, it's looking at the architecture as a placeholder, but showing the possibilities for, again, providing PV installations and usable roof tops for external amenity. Then trying to sort of draw a focus into how these spaces in between might work, and really looking at the sorts of uses. So we've tried to show the trampoline, and in the top one there's a greenhouse, and we created an image that just tries to evoke what this space could be, and we're just sort of dreaming into what could a community garden provide. Shared growing space, shared eating and coming together space. Okay, thank you. I'm going to pass over to Andrew.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. My name's Andrew Kirby. I'm the director and founder of Andrew Kirby Architects. We were established as a practice back in 2005, and we established the practice purely on the basis of delivering on the agenda of sustainability within the built environment. So we've worked for quite a long time over understanding how to deliver sustainable buildings, but the bigger challenge is not just on delivering energy efficiency, solar panels, and nice environmentally friendly buildings and landscapes, but it's actually how to achieve that on volume and how to deliver on a wider issue of housing problems within the UK. So what we found is that has evolved for us as a practice into working with communities, and that's been a key aspect of how we've understood how we can unlock land assets, work with local communities and deliver housing values, housing to meet the values we think are essential to taking things forward. So that's effectively socially responsible housing, affordable housing, which is linked to it, the spaces and the community spaces that come as part of that Jonny's just been talking about, but also sustainability. And I think, as Paul's mentioned previously, is just the main issue around where the investment of development goes. And when it comes, when it's taken out of the land values and the development to put into profits, we look at solutions and mechanisms by working with communities to invest back into the building. And that's effectively affordability and the sustainability and the landscape values and placemaking of those particular projects. So to give you some background as to how we've worked before, we've worked with communities across the Southwest in the last 15 years. It's been an exciting journey. But it started off quite small. So it started off with, like I say, understanding ecological building methods. That was things like straw bale, rammed earth, and recycled newspaper, all these things that used to make us really excited about building and building in the right way. But working with a community to be able to achieve that was the real way that it started to unlock its true potential in not just doing one-off eco-house for a private client, but working with a group of people passionate about building the houses that they want and they need in the places they want to have them. So it started with a small scheme of 6 straw bale houses for Broadhemston Community Land Trust. It was a very exciting scheme. We effectively turned things on its head. So as architects, we wanted to understand how that could happen. And effectively, the procurement process needed to change, and we needed to look at the community taking control of that. And that's the building process, owning the supply chain, and us as architects effectively just becoming facilitators. So taking a step back from that process, or taking a step back from owning the project and working with contractors and waiting for people to come in and buy the houses at the end, is let the community run and own that process. We found that method of community ownership and community management has been a really effective way of the endeavour that comes out of that, and the belief to change and achieve buildings and spaces that really work for them. So these houses were delivered at an exceptionally affordable rate. This is back before 2010, so it's quite an old project. But they're based on an old solar solar passive design principle. They're heated by the sun, they're insulated with straw bales, and they're also heated with renewable technologies. So you can see, again, just how the shared spaces form part of that overall community development. So everybody's pulled together, and the way that the community came together to do it and live in that space has been quite exceptional. So going from a very small scale, that's grown into quite a large scale community ownership opportunities. And the project on the right is a project called Atmosphere Totnes. Our practice is based in Totnes, so we've worked exclusively on that project for quite a long time. It's a large brownfield site, 3.5 hectares. It's not too dissimilar in terms of the extent of constraints and linked to the town as the Saxonvale site in Frome. But again, a large mixed-use site that wanted to pull away from the hands of developers and put into the hands of the community. So that land asset was crucial for the local economy of the town. And the passion of the town is very similar town, Totnes, to Frome in terms of its activism and its community life and engagement and making things happen for themselves. We took this project forward through a consultation that was linked to what ended up being a community right to build order. So that went through a community consultation process, so working with community groups all the way through and stakeholders, and leading to a couple of stages within the design development process that the community kind of owned and signed off during that stage. The houses they want, the uses they want, community facilities, all the different things. And effectively resulted in a referendum that gave a community right to build order, put that in place, and that's the legal equivalent of a planning permission. So that set the planning standards for that site. So anybody, whether it's the community doing it or anybody else looking to develop on that site, need to meet those standards. Now, it's still an ongoing battle for the land itself, which is a slightly separate thing, but the work that we did with the community was adopted into the joint local plan and effectively formed policy that helps shape the future of the town. So that's the kind of example of how we've worked and how we want to continue to work with the exciting work we're doing here with Mayday Saxonvale in Frome. So it's very much something we believe in as a way of doing things. We do it pretty much exclusively now as a practice. Like I said, we started with eco houses, now work with communities. And I think one thing that's worth mentioning about this way of working is not just business as usual as with architects and builders and developers. Is we when we study architecture, we believe in a set of values. We're told we can change things, and then when you come into the real world, you're hit with this kind of hard reality. And if you work for a commercial practice, say, your mentors go from quite inspiring people to someone saying you need to learn about how the real world works, and it just isn't the case. I think if we believe in our skills and our ability to make change, the construction bit, the building bit, the design bit's all actually quite easy. We're really well trained to do that, but it's how do we get those principles and those values embodied into a scheme and to make a scheme a much better scheme for local people. And that is by empowering communities, by working with communities and stepping back into a servant type role to help facilitate a process where communities can make their own decisions, decide on their own designs and decide on their own spaces. And I think the decisions that they invariably make when we stand back and don't influence those decisions are the better decisions around design, environment, the climate crisis, affordable housing. All those things come from inevitably from people making decisions for themselves, as opposed to a developer looking to effectively devalue those things. Because as Paul was saying, it doesn't work, it doesn't tie in with the profits they need to pull out of that site to make it worth doing for them. So this is the benefit of community ownership, is non-profit and everybody being able to work out their best effectively to achieve those values. So a couple more examples of how we've worked over the years. We've worked with Southampton District Council now, so we've set up a housing programme with them. This is more of a rural, less urban, more rural type of a project, which is clusters of small community projects in high value rural areas across the south of Devon. It's a very, very high value area, places like Salcombe, Dartmouth, where locals have been massively priced out through second homes and just again, inflated house prices. So that's working with local landowners, achieving land assets, getting planning permission and delivering affordable housing. So they're projects now that are being built. We're literally signing projects off as they come. They're coming in at 60% of market value in terms of affordable housing for local people in rural areas. Then we also work all the way down in Cornwall. This is one for Launceston Community Development Trust. Very, very similar model. So we've got, sort of 7 or 8 of these types of projects going through the various stages of planning and construction at the moment in rural areas. So it's very much a baseline principle of how we work. We always think we've figured it out, but every community does it slightly differently. So we've got to be fluid and engage in the process, but we've got that kind of rule-breaking and disruptive aspect to how we operate as architects and how we understand the procurement processes to be able to adapt to the fluidity of how communities might work and how they might work to achieve the best values that they need for their local town or village. So that's just an example of our work, and then moving into Saxonvale itself. So this is largely just an update on the housing numbers. So there's a mix of housing across the site. So again, this comes through from local need, but also will come from decisions you make as the process unfolds through the more detailed planning processes. So we've got 220 residential units. Jonny's just talked to you about how the garden spaces work, and the river garden development, which is a fabulous evolution of the design of the site, I feel. And we've got a mixture of units from 1 bedroom to 6 bedroom, but the large proportion of those units sit within the 1 to 4 bedroom range to make sure there's a comfortable and good multi-generational mix of residential types across the site. So one of the strong aspects of the scheme as well is the micro homes, effectively 1 bedroom, effectively starter units. Services a very, very strong aspect of the housing model across the site, and that enables the access onto the housing ladder into housing for either young people getting started and getting into a unit of similar size, but then using these shared spaces to benefit from being part of a community as opposed to being locked away in a flat. So the micro units are a very strong aspect, or for people later in life looking to downsize and then free up bigger units within the town or within the site to allow families to move in and downsize. And again, these kind of shared spaces, the way the master plan works, is effectively allowing this multi-generational activity and community interaction in all the public spaces through the site. That leads me on to just talking a bit about the public realm aspect. Now, Jonny's put very eloquently, he's talked about the gardens, which I think is a fabulous part of the enclosures within each quarter, within each development area. But then effectively the mesh of what brings all of those together. The buildings are effectively just buildings whilst they're sustainable and nice. What really brings it together is the public realm. So Simon at Land Stories did some fabulous work on the landscape design coupled with the overall master planning principles. And that is about a public realm that is built around placemaking. And that's looking at very strong principles of effectively providing shared spaces where everyone comes together, because that's how communities come together, is in the streets and in the gardens and in the spaces, making sure those spaces are free from cars. So it's designed as a car-free site. And the idea was to get all of the cars out of the main arteries of the site and get them hidden away under the buildings. Now, we're not denying that cars aren't needed. We need to make sure that the infrastructure works for services, emergencies, all the different things that any town or any city needs, but it's done in a way where that isn't the dominant factor of the placemaking strategy. So it frees up placemaking for people to be, for sustainable urban drainage strategies to work, for gardens and strong cultural public realm opportunities. So all of those form the principles of it, and yes, that's kind of what we've aimed to achieve. So it's a car-free site in the sense of pedestrian priority through most spaces, whilst allowing service access. So the car parking, I think like Paul says, it sounds like a boring subject, but it's really, really important, because if we don't get this kind of stuff right, then cars dominate the street scene. They dominate all the spaces between houses, and it's more about just being able to drive to your house, park in front of your front door, and then walk into your house, and then just sort of go straight in. So it's really about how those spaces merge into the overall master plan feeling and public space, and making sure the parking still works and facilitates the development in the necessary way that you know all developments need. So we've got different areas of parking. Effectively, we've got the different number of spaces. So in the Hill Terrace, we've got 63 spaces in an undercroft car parking with housing on top. The Eastern Residential Quarter, which is number 2, is a housing quarter for the site. And again, Because of the sloping nature of the site, it's a really good opportunity to bring cars in underneath the site, so it doesn't form part of the street frontage. You still get very strong frontage for the houses, and it goes under the garden spaces, so that effectively people can come in and then rise up into the houses to access them. And that there are individual spaces under larger units as well for people to park there. 3 is a mixed use quarter, which is in the centre of the site, and that's, again, we've got quite a lot of car parking spaces in there, 77, and effectively that, because of the commercial uses on the ground floor, things like shops and offices that might be allocated into those spaces with flats and maisonettes above. You've got then the again, all the cars hidden, so you can drive in, you can service those businesses and service those houses, and people can get in without it dominating the street, seeing vans pulled up on sidewalks, all those kind of things. So it's a safer, more human type of environment for people to enjoy. Number 6 is in the centre of the site. We've got, we call it the L building, we've got 10 units. As Jonny's just talked about, the River Gardens, 37, not units, car parking spaces, sorry. And the press shops is where the micro homes is going to be on top of. So again, we've used that as an opportunity to place housing in an innovative way on top of car parking spaces. So again, that's that's adjacent to the town centre, so it really does help with that car parking need. So what that leads to really is is understanding then that you know, how cars and how parking and whilst we're passionate about low carbon buildings and sustainable landscapes and placemaking, all those kind of things, and people, a sustainable transport plan is a crucial part of the design process. So again, it's really important to understand that, you know, a nice house is all very well, but an affordable house is all very well, but if you're driving to it, and the overall carbon considerations that we need to try and meet are largely linked to transport and travel as well. So this ties in with Somerset County Council's own approach. I'm not going to read all of that in detail, but effectively it's ensuring that we've got the opportunity for car hubs, car share opportunities, cycle share spaces, and all of those have been built into the master plan and the principles that underpin its values. So as all that detail comes out, we can demonstrate all the needs of the future can be met through its infrastructure and through its parking plan, as well as the housing and the low energy principles that we're supporting. So I can just pick up on a couple of things there. I mean, from Somerset's own words, is reduced parking provision in combination with hard and soft travel plan measures. So it gives the opportunity for these car share type opportunities, electric cars, car charging, all those things. And the more grouped together they are, the more efficient that is as a way of providing those charging hubs. The vision in these areas is for low car ownership and ambitious modal shift enabled by an increase in multimodal travel measures. So again, you know, making sure that the opportunity for these things happens, so that people do, you know, our own staff refuse to have cars. So, you know, it's a bit tricky in South Devon actually, because we've got to go to different parts of the countryside to get to different housing projects. But in a town like Frome, it's making more and more sense, and in cities like Plymouth, Exeter, Bristol, is people going car free, because you just don't need them. The transport's quite good. Setting up and improving public transport is really good, and having access to a car is okay. Owning a car is becoming less and less necessary. So the master plan for Frome supports that. And then again, design parking to be unobtrusive in the public realm. So we've just talked about that, is not having cars, streets filled with cars and dominating that space and taking over the feeling of that space and how it feels to relax there, to travel through it, to live there, and you know, effectively being able to phase cars out so that we can add that to the overall low carbon aspirations of the master plan. And that's pretty much it as an update on that, but thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm going to ask you to possibly come and sit up at the front, if that's okay. Just in case anyone's got any questions at the end before we close. Holly's got the microphone if you've got one.
Any questions?
Yeah, just building on the last presentation, I know you haven't probably, you wouldn't have got to this level of detail yet, but thinking in terms of if people are living in flats or sort of one-bedroom properties, having the appropriate cycle storage will be so important for that whole vision. And, you know, Sheffield stands aren't enough, having, you know, bike hangers where you actually have a code to be able to access your bike if you're using it as your main form of transport would be amazing as part of that vision. And then the other thing around cycling is the fact that when you leave the Saxonvale estate, you know, the rest of the town, we really struggle in terms of having safe cycling routes. There's not the space to put segregated cycle paths, for example. Frome Town Council just developed a local walking and cycling infrastructure plan, but we've got no funding to deliver it. So we've got a nice plan of what needs to be done. But I'm wondering if there's any sort of scope for, through Section 106 funding, for example, for funding some of those measures so that actually once you've left the estate, you know, you can make your journey safely.
Yeah, so we certainly have an allocation of S106 funding for some external highway works. I mean, those have been set at the moment, and they include creating some segregated cycle areas in places just outside. But I think if we are successful in getting to detailed planning, I think there's every opportunity to really open that up, as there is for everything, into proper considered discussion with the town council and others about, yeah, how do we, you know, we've already looked at the bridge in terms of a better type of connectivity through the town. The cycle paths is definitely one of those other areas. There are clearly also constraints as you exit into the main town centre, but we need to do the best we can. And on cycle storage, yeah, certainly the plan is that every house has access to cycle storage, either within their unit or within shared spaces on the site.
Hi. It's all very exciting, and it's great to see some of the details, so I really appreciate that. I think, I'm sorry, I can't remember who he was. Is it Kirby Architects from Totnes or whatever?
At the end?
So the emphasis was very much, your experience is very much working with the community, and indeed that's what Mayday has been doing and wants to continue to do. But I just wonder how that translates to the people who actually will be living on the site. So in an ideal world, I guess, or have you done this in terms of actually engaging with potential people that are living there rather than the wider community? Because the wider community might say one thing, but people living on the site may say something different, or they may say the same. And can I just add two little other points as well? So 220 homes, you're trying to encourage less car use, but it's 1.5 car, 333 car spaces. So straight away, you're sort of promoting the idea that you can have a car because you've got a space. It doesn't work. And I know there's restrictions on you around that in terms of the county setting standards, and I think you've gone below the standard, and that, well, just at the level of it. So that's the other thing I quickly wanted to ask was the guy who was talking about solar batteries and stuff like that, and solar panels and stuff. You didn't mention battery storage, so rather importing from the grid when you need it, battery storage. So, but my main question is about the community benefit stuff.
Yeah, I'll go through it as quickly as I can. So this is going to be an evolving process, but I think from our experience, there's two sides to it. As you say, there's the participation of the people that will be living in the buildings or participating in the build of some of the housing or aspects of the scheme directly. And then there's also the wider community participation or consultation that's going to inform into it. Now, both are equally important in my experience. So the process that is likely to unfold is an open consultation process which will involve the input of the community going through. So that's not necessarily about the people that are going to live there making those decisions for their houses. It's about the community making decisions and participating in that process. Now, the second part of it about specifically housing and participation within the site, it depends how that model ultimately is structured in the long term. So I think more detail will come out on that later on. But effectively, it's what we call stakeholder consultation. So it's about how various stakeholders or groups might be involved in potentially taking aspects of the housing, and how they might participate in the procurement and facilitating of that housing. So broadly, the principles underpinning the whole project will be, helped to be informed by the community as a whole. But then more specifically, if there's a group that need to be assist or be part of building some of the houses, that would be more of them being involved directly in that. But I mean, it sort of links to this thing about custom build. It's quite a big subject, but custom build is massively encouraged to enable people to participate in the process of building their own houses more. But it just needs to be managed carefully, with it not being kind of a free-for-all and everything. There needs to be reasonable measures and standards and construction methods and supply chains in place to ensure that it can be done in a rational and cost-effective way. Can you just remind me your second question? It was on the
second question wasn't really about you. It was just a comment, really. It wasn't a question, an observation.
Oh, cars. That's right. Yeah, sorry. So, yeah, the 1.5 cars. So it's a really good question, and it's a challenge. There's no doubt about that. But if we go to 2 car parking spaces per unit, it just floods. There are travel and transport consultants that are part of the design team that are working to help us achieve this. Now, local authorities are trying to work to achieve these future standards, which is to move away from the car. So, in many ways, you're at the front end of making those changes and those challenges, and understanding and dealing with those challenges. So we've got to work together. The team have to work together with the community to understand that, first of all, not pretend it's not there, not be overambitious and think it's just going to be okay. But effectively, it all comes into, in our experience with the Atmos project, is people that live there buying into not needing a car. So, because very real risks are people. So, for example, if you bought a house, or you lived in a house, you're resident in the site, you would have to sign up to not owning, more than one car, say, or signing up to being a part of a car club, because the risk is you get displacement parking. So it's a very real thing, and I think we've got to look at these risks and spill them all out and say, what are they, and can it affect third parties? Will the people be parking their other cars or on the site, so other people's residential areas? So it's got to be very carefully managed, and there's consultants that will make that happen. But it is innovative, it is new, and this is our way of leading on it, and you'll be part of that leading process.
Thank you.
So the battery question, there could be a case for batteries. What happens at the next stage when you go through the detailed engineering design for a development like this? How's it going to be heated? How many EV chargers are there going to be? What's the use of that? How much solar can fit on the roofs? And then you run a whole load of simulations of that solar that's being generated by hopefully maximizing the rooftop potential. Is it all going to get used on site as it's generated? And the best thing you can do with solar power is use it for its end purpose, whether that's heating hot water, which is a form of storage, charging cars, which can be flexible. If there is a residual surplus of solar, there could be a case for a battery to store that so it can then be used later on. There could also be a case for a battery to buy cheap power overnight and supply it to the development in the day, but that will come out of the engineering process.
Yeah, could I just add to a little bit about community, John? Saxonvale is a wider community conversation. I think it's always been like that. It's gone back that way through decades. And it is a genuine, the Mayday plan is a genuine extension to the town centre with new centrally located town centre facilities that everybody in the town will be using. So you're getting a great mix of communities coming into this site. It's not going to be, oh, what are they doing over there and what are they doing over there kind of thing. This is a new adventure for Frome. And on the word community, it's a word I always think about before I use it every single time. I'm not sure what it means. I'm still working that out. And I think that this, we're on the cusp of a big adventure here, and it gives us a chance to find innovative answers to a lot of the challenges that face us, including what is a community.
First of all, I'd like to thank you very much for your presentations. Very stimulating, very interesting, thank you. I read today that the National Lottery Heritage Fund are wanting to invest in placemaking in a major way. They are planning on 20 nominated sites, and I think they've got 9 already allocated. Is there a move for Frome and Mayday to jump in there quickly?
Short answer is yes. As I said, we're trying to leave no stone unturned in the way we pulled together a funding package. So absolutely, I'd not read it, but I've had my head in other things today. But why not?
Yeah. And I think, if you look at all of the community uses that we talked about last time, I think it puts us in so many different aspects of the site, both in terms of building it and using it in the way we want. We're going to be so well positioned to go after, and we'll go after as many of those as we possibly can. We'll have a funding office that's pumping out applications, I can promise you. Yeah. Any other questions at all? That's right.
I don't know if I should know the answer to this already, but I don't. Can I ask who are residents?
Who are? Are you best able to articulate that, Paul?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm brilliantly well placed, but it's effectively an investment fund that focus on pulling together long-term patient money to focus on social problems. So they do things like they support people buying and funding affordable housing projects and things like that. So they bring in some money from central government. So they'll bring in money. For example, a lot of the housing grant underspend that's happening at the moment because house building has slowed right down. It's coming through to them. There is a certain amount of money in dormant bank accounts that comes through a thing called Big Society Capital, which they have access to, and so they combine those sources of money with money from like the Greater Manchester Pension Fund and things like that. And so they collect all this money and point it at worthwhile.
Are they publicly listed or?
I don't think so. I don't think they're listed. They're more like a fund manager. So they go around and collect all the money together and then try and deploy it into worthy projects.
Yeah, sorry about this. I've just come up with another one. Acorn. I know they've been thrown out at the moment and they're likely to be reapplying. Something in their statement said to the effect that, I can't remember the wording, but they have an agreement with Somerset or a contract with Somerset.
Yeah, so they have a contractual arrangement with Somerset, and that's absolutely correct. But I think the most important aspect of that is how tied in Somerset are to that arrangement. And last summer, in a public meeting, in an official meeting, the lead council of what was then Mendip District Council was at pains to suggest and to state that the council or Acorn can determine the contract and can walk away from the contract, those precise words. And actually, after that, other members of the committee, including the deputy leader, were at pains to point out that flexibility exists, and indeed that's why they needed to sign the Section 106 agreement in that particular meeting.
Yes, just add to that the stipulation of the contract is they have a satisfactory planning agreement, which they don't have. So they don't have a contract. I mean, they do have a contract. It's a 90-page document with their name on it and Mendip District Council's name on it. It's probably been crossed out, Somerset Council on it. But they don't actually, in my view, have a contract until they have a satisfactory planning application, which means going back to the beginning.
There's a lot of commercial space proposed now. Is some of that upper floors, not all ground floor, because upper floor space for commercial can be a lot more difficult to let? And do you think the rents will need to be subsidised in some cases in order to make sure that all of that space will be let?
I think there's a lot of commercial space on the ground floor. There is some that's on a second floor in places within the site. No, we don't think it will need to be subsidised to be let. We think that the rates where they are at the moment, and with the placemaking that we're going to put in place, will support those commercial spaces. I mean, we put out an expression of interest for the space that we have in the site, and it was over 150% subscribed. These are expressions of interest at this stage, but there's a huge amount of interest. And we know that anecdotally anyway, living in the town, about the businesses that get to a certain scale and then leave because there's nowhere for them to be in place. So we think the demand is strong, particularly for this type of workspace in the town centre. But we'll also take it step by step and test the market. So, that patience that Paul alluded to, some of that first commercial space can, create the market, which better and more robustly underpins the development of some of the later commercial buildings. Yeah. Any other questions? No?
Thanks very much. Thanks for great presentations, everybody. Absolutely fantastic. Quick question on the retailing. Have you thought about the kind of retail mix in terms of what's going to happen inside the development? I mean, I say that because at one point I counted, I think it was 10 barber shops in Frome. We've got 5 charity shops, a lot of shops closing. But what's the kind of thought behind the retailing and how it's going to work?
Okay, well, I think it's fair to say we haven't thought about it, at least not not to any detail. I mean, obviously we'll be doing that at the detailed planning stage. But some of the ideas that have been put forward, for example, would be that there's probably going to be some kind of a circular economy operating in the Not Store, which is one of the big units at the bottom of the site. And the latest conversations that we've had with architects and Assemble and Adventure are that some of those retail spaces could actually be materials based. Of course, a retail shop is not like a box with a little sort of kitchenette at the back anymore. It's, it's our understanding of retail is that it's modular. You have a storage facility, you have a manufacturing facility, you have a sales area, you have an admin area, you have a packing area. All these things have to be very purposeful and directed and bespoke for that particular retail business. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see the retail mix. I think we've got enough barbershops in Frome.
I think the other thing to add is that it needs to be complementary to the rest of the town. So we certainly don't want to be creating a scenario where we're trying to, create another retail competitor to the wonderful Catherine Street, Palmer Street, etc. That's not the objective. This needs to be additive and complementary. So this is going to be about, market testing, thinking about what works, taking it step by step. And I think probably the overall emphasis is less retail and more workspace, if you looked at our commercial mix. Winging its way to you now.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, is it not possible to design in flexibility? Because especially when it comes to retail, we, from these questions, we don't really know what the demand is going to be. And in terms of thinking about sustainability in the future, these buildings need to have some flexibility so that, okay, maybe if the retail doesn't really happen, they could be used more for commercial or for some other purpose. So just in terms of thinking about how they're designed, it would be nice to think there was some thoughts about flexibility.
Yeah, 100%, totally agree. Yeah, that a unit could be used as workspace, retail, food or drink, give it that flexibility because, yeah, something might work now. Markets change. We can see that right now. What works now may not in 10 years, 50 years. So just totally agree. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how the road system's going to work in Frome, because to supply all these developments, we're going to have to change the road system completely and to make it safe and workable. So I'm just wondering if the people who are developing them have thought of these, how they will develop.
Yes, the road system won't change a great deal. We're making decisions which are avoiding creating congestion in the middle of the town. So we're looking at free-flowing traffic and a one-way system through Vicarage Street. We've reduced the density of the housing from Acorn's application from 300, I think it was, down to 220. And you just heard the presentations regarding the parking on the site. So we're looking to keep parking on site at a minimum. We've looked into this in quite a lot of detail, and we'll be presenting more about it. It's a challenge, no doubt about it. Originally, when the Saxonvale site was nominated as a development site, it had a new road actually going to it from Wallbridge through the old Hanson Works, which you might remember. Unfortunately, Mayday Council gave planning permission for a dense housing scheme on that site, and that opportunity was lost, which means that the only access to the site is through the Portway junction. But we won't be putting traffic lights there, which was a big problem, I thought, with the Acorn approach. And
the new theatre that's developed just backs onto my house in the Portway Chapel. They've the wise
yes, the Wise Children.
Also, and I live up in that area, and
Yes.
these huge lorries come along there.
Yes, I know.
Huge lorries.
I know. Yeah.
It should be going on some bypass.
Well, that's a long conversation. That's to do with raising the railway bridge on the Spring Gardens bypass. That's been sort of rambling on for a very long time. I don't know where we are with that, quite honestly, but it is a long-term aspiration to raise that bridge, in which case that would take that heavy goods lorries off of the need to come through Christchurch Street East.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, I moved here 24 years ago, and I got heavily involved before I got too busy at work with trying to help the development of the traffic system in Frome. There's a 7.5 ton weight limit, which is unenforceable because of the Spring Gardens Bridge. And whilst I accept a couple of houses along there will disbenefit from what would be a route through there, I got free of charge the Wiltshire Technical Authority to say you could lower the bridge and lower the road under the bridge, but the argument came back from Somerset County Council that it wouldn't be cost effective or something within 5 years or something like that. And I said, well, and there was no money bid for it. So I said, well, put your money in now, bid it 10 years, 15 years, 20 years hence, and then you'll have the money to do your bypass. And I'm afraid it's just, it's typical short-term thinking, which has snarled the whole, and as I walked up the street here, from Christchurch Street here, a massive Pantech went belting up the thing, and it ruins Frome. So it's, and this example of what we're trying to develop here, long-term thinking is outstanding. And I think it's the way that life's got to go.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, so there's a lot of good sentiment about and a lot of great ideas. So I suppose my question would be around for all of you, if possible, what obstacles exist? What what are you working against? What are the holdups and potential solutions from here? For example, like the free money that potentially could be unlocked. If you can use it before March 24, I can only assume that the council are just terrified about the potential legalities of that. But I don't know. But yeah, so what obstacles are you working against that are holding you back from all these brilliant ideas?
I mean, it's really one big one. We need Somerset to sell us the land, and I'm not sure what would particularly frighten them about receiving that cash up front at this exact moment, given their financial position as they have, as many councils up and down the country have. What we desperately want to do is sit down with Somerset and explain to them why this can be a win for Frome, a win for them, and try to get them to sell us the site. Now, then we've got to actually deliver it, right? That's obviously going to include a whole series of challenges, some that are unknown, some that might be in the ground that no one foresaw. That's property development. But yeah, I think buy the land. I mean, I think that's it. Yeah, of course.
When you say legalities, do you mean anxieties about possible legal action by Acorn? Is that what you mean? Yeah, we definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's it. Anyone else? Yep.
Thank you. Slight question, I think, for Andy Kirby. 14 six-bedroom units. Are they on the top floor, on the bottom floor? Who will be buying six-bedroom units? I'm intrigued.
I might take that one. Is that right? Yeah. So, yeah, sure. So that we do have that many units, and it is a bit of a disparity when you look at how many 5 units there are. But we think there probably is a market for a number of those units. It's only 14. That's 14 buyers that we've got to find. To live in a central location, to have, say, 2 offices for people working and the rest of their family, and they're in an area of family homes. But we're not at detailed yet, so there's more market testing to be done and to evaluate, and we absolutely could switch some of those typologies, maybe to look a bit more like the River Gardens in terms of duplex construction. So yeah, we're open-minded about that, and I think that could shift, but I think we could conclude that there is a market for 14 units of that sort. I think Nikki and then...
Thanks. Jake mentioned that the design of the microgrid would partly be very reliant on how houses are heated. I was wondering how much thought has gone into that yet. Like, is there a potential for sort of communal ground source heating? Is it all going to be off gas? And what sort of insulation levels are you looking at in terms of standards for energy efficient homes?
Yeah, so we've got, we're looking at a level that's higher than the Future Home Standard. We haven't yet got into all of those different types of, heat sources that we could use, partly because we don't, we have also identified some passive house suppliers that we actually think could operate quite competitively if we deliver at scale. And if it's passive house, then the level of heating requirement is dramatically lower. So I think there's the kind of sequence of investigation that we would undertake. But yeah, I'm sure if we needed to, we'd look for, communal sources of heat if they could be delivered, whether they're ground source or whatever they might be.
I've forgotten what I was going to ask, one of the questions. The other question was wind power. Is that designed into the site at all in any way?
It's not at the moment.
Okay. It's a kind of non-starter in a location like that.
Yeah, but it might come into the grid. That's
Yeah.
top up.
Yeah, like the wind turbines really need to be on the top of hills. That's where they do best. And then, yeah, complex urban developments in a valley, they don't do that well. But yeah, we need perhaps Frome needs a communal wind turbine somewhere.
The six-bedroom properties would benefit from being turned into bed and breakfasts, perhaps.
We have got a community-owned hotel by the riverside, so that might provide for that. Yeah. John.
Yeah, I mean, 6-bedroom, I looked at that and thought, 6-bedroom really, but is it not the case that some of your, and I appreciate what you're saying about this is a social enterprise, not for profit, and great, so, but the reality may well be that some of the market homes, i.e. the 6-bedroom homes, will subsidise and support the funding of other homes, particularly around affordable shared ownership and social rented, which the town is desperately in need of. And they're desperately in need of all those 3, not just social housing. We're desperate in need of value for money, if you like, and real affordable rented homes for people. So I just wonder, so I looked at it and I thought, well, okay, if you get 2 million for a 6-bedroom house and it cost you 500,000 to build, that's great because you've got $1.5 million to spend on more social rented and affordable homes. So I'll go for it. I'm not going to buy £1 million home. I'm just saying, I think in principle, it's a good idea to have larger homes because then you get your turnover in terms of income.
Yeah, I mean, the reality...
Is that the thinking or not? Am I totally off piece?
That's quite all right. I mean, certainly the reality of the scheme and how the model works is that we need to make the money on the residential and the commercial to some degree so that we can do all these great things in the rest of the site. And that includes delivering affordable homes. And just to say, I guess, if we were applying this model to not a non-town central site where employment space wasn't the priority, then that could be redirected to more affordable homes, dramatically more affordable homes. So maybe there's some opportunities in the future to take the model, but not do in the town centre and deliver exception sites, high amounts of affordable homes. Yeah. I think this is going to be the last question from Emily over there.
Thank you. Is Mayday Saxonvale going to remain in charge of cash flow on the site? I mean, how is it going to be managed on an ongoing basis?
Do you mean post-development?
Post-development.
So post-development, we talked last week about there'll be then the creation of there'll be a creation of a new community company. And how that is constituted, we haven't yet determined, but they would own the public realm, all the infrastructure, and all of the community assets. And we're going to release some films of last week. You give me a good nod to do that. No, that's fine. And because of some of the technical issues we had last week, we're filming each of those sections separately on site. Freddie's kindly done that for us. So we'll be releasing those over the coming days. And one of those ones explains a bit more about that aspect.
Yeah, just to add to that, so Mayday Saxonvale would act as the master developer in partnership with Stories, but effectively after 7 years, which is the sort of build out of the site, we wouldn't be there anymore. We would have handed over the assets of the site, the infrastructure, to a range of different CICs, KICs, and amongst those will be what's called a top co, which is a sort of it's a CIC that will basically have overall management on top of that, but also in my mind have the aspiration of trying to generate activity in what we're doing in Frome elsewhere out in the country. So that will be part of its remit and part of the management and arts of that company. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
No. So Mayday Saxonvale has been only created to deliver this site. Yeah. Well, certainly the rest of these fine professionals do, yeah. In broad terms, yeah. Is there, unless there's one burning for Steve, it's you, okay then.
Sorry, Paul. Am I right in thinking that your funding model, i.e., phase one funds, phase two, phase three, etc., is more resilient to cost of materials? That we've seen cost of materials increase, almost exponentially over the last sort of 18 months. I'm sort of trying to get my head around thinking, well, if you're funding everything up front as a traditional developer, you're then at the behest of the cost of those materials going up, but your funding's already there. So eventually you could run out of money, or it could become a bit of a problem. But the fact that you're funding as you go along, does that mean you're more resilient to those cost increases because you're effectively funding it, in 2 years' time when phase two or phase three comes on, you can sit down and have a look at the numbers then, and then decide what you need, and then move forward from there?
Yeah, very hard. What I would say, I will slightly duck it and say that the funding model in the round creates resilience. It creates the ability to be patient and to take stock of shocks. I think, look,
where I was coming from, actually, yeah. I mean, the traditional funding, it's sort of all set up at the start, isn't it? and then you just hope that it all sort of over a 4 or 5 year period, you hope it all works out. But I guess with your model, you are more resilient to those shocks.
Yeah, it's sort of not wanting to get too political about it, but kind of it's almost anti-capitalist. Like whereas the developer model it puts the capital return as the primary driver, we're trying to invert that so that we actually keep the outcomes at the centre of the decisions. So when difficult decisions are made, a traditional development company will be looking to reduce the amount of affordable housing, reduce its obligations, dilute the quality. You've seen a recent example in Greenwich in London. I don't know if you've seen it in the press, of a tower that was built really completely contrary to the actual consent it achieved, and the council served notice to demolish it. It was quite drastic, but it's symptomatic of the approach of trying to the absolute pursuit of profit. And so fundamentally, the model is trying to turn that on its head. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I'm actually going to put Jonny on the spot and give you a quick chance to promote your event this week, given you've given over your time so beautifully. And you may say anything else that you want.
Well, all I'd say is that if any of you got any further questions, we've got an exhibition at the Silk Mill Gallery running this week until Sunday. So tomorrow I'm going to be doing a talk about some of the work, talking about Mayday in a bit more depth. So you'll be very welcome to come down, have a glass of wine or a beer, 6:30 at the gallery.
And just to extend that just briefly, if you have any questions about this, and this goes now and into the future, you can just reach out, our emails and etc. on the website, and then we can meet up for a chat and go through anything in some more detail. But I think, we're 7 minutes over, so we'll call it a close there. Thanks so much for coming this evening. Yeah, much appreciated. Thank you.